good news in this, and there are some challenges that are identified, and we were very happy with the external evaluators, how they handled themselves and how they handled really the logistics and implementation of the plan. Just as a reminder, we wrote our three major plans, English language learners, special education, and advanced learner, to do four things for our district. To really define our vision and commitment to these students, to articulate services provided. As a reminder, these are the groups that actually have state and federal mandates attached to them. So English language learners, advanced learners, students with special education needs. And we wrote the plan so that it would give us common language about how we support and provide experiences that are high quality to students that are English language learners. So Sylvia is going to start with some very high level results. A more detailed, much more detailed, and much longer plan is to come. We're getting it translated right now. We want to also digest it with our team. There's lots more data in it that we're looking forward to sharing with you. And we'll all get more cracks at this, so to speak. So we're going to take the year to disseminate, gather feedback. We'll come back to you with some drafts that we'll want to talk to you about as the year comes to an end and moving over the summer and into next fall. And then always just a soundbite around external evaluators. They are external folks that make recommendations and provide feedback. And we look at all of that, we synthesize it, and then we decide what is best for us in our local context. So I just wanted to make sure that that you knew that we have our own ways of working here in Madison and want to see also from an external point of view how we can improve and make things better. So I'm going to stop, and I'm going to let Sylvia take over.
Thank you everyone for your time. As a reminder, this evaluation is about the 3-year ELL plan that we engaged 4 years ago. The plan had been approved in October of 2015, and it contained 6 major areas where we wanted to engage in improvement. This external evaluation was conducted by an organization called the Center for Applied Linguistics. We had worked with them about 10 years ago during our first external evaluation of our dual language immersion program. So we were familiar with their ways of working, and again, it has been a pleasure working with them. This evaluation implements the implementation, outcomes, and impact using a variety of data. CAL, as we have referred to this organization, has used 4 key sources that are listed there for you. These are frameworks that we are familiar with and we use consistently in our professional development with our staff. So the evaluation consisted of 3 main objectives. To what extent have strategies that we included in the ELL plan been implemented? To what extent have indicators in the plan shown improvement? And then third, to what extent stakeholders have been satisfied with the implementation. So we used both a mixed methods approach with both quantitative data using our state mandated and district assessments, MAP, Forward, and ACT, as well as qualitative data that included document reviews, online surveys of our staff, focus groups with parents and teachers and students, as well as classroom observations. So let's go into the first section, which is the quantitative analysis of student performance outcomes. So what's new for us in the way CAL has displayed the data is that it disaggregates student data in a different way. It disaggregates into current ELLs and former ELLs to form a total ELL subgroup, as well as the never ELL. And then they have recommended that we move forward using this type of data analysis to get more precise insights and to be able to develop more actionable next steps. So what they found from the student performance outcomes is that gaps persist. This first graph that I'm sharing with you shows the total ELL compared to the never ELL subgroups for both reading and math based on the 2017-2018 MAP data. And it shows that there's a gap between the two subgroups and that both groups peak at around 4th grade, and then the percentage of proficient and advanced students decreases through 8th grade. Yes.
I should have asked this before. How would you like to handle questions? You wanted us to wait until the end, and then can you clarify, like, what, like, for ELs, is this not just they're the ones that are receiving services?
Right, so sometimes I will refer to students as current ELLs.
Yeah.
So those are students who are active, currently receiving services. And sometimes I will refer as former ELLs. And then when we say total ELLs, it's both of those subgroups.
But former is if they have ever, so they have had services in the past,
Correct.
but they have discontinued.
But they've exited.
And they exit because we reached the
Yeah.
DPI level
Full
of
proficiency.
proficiency.
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Down on the desegregation, are we worried that the sample size will get too small if we make it from current ELL to former ELL to never EL? Are we worried about people figuring out who the students may be?
No. The former ELL data is smaller compared to the current ELL, but not so small that you would be able to track that.
And then how you like to handle questions moving forward?
I think probably going through the whole, I will try to go through highlights, and then we can go through all the questions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I will add on these last two slides, because we're just talking about how interesting this all is. One of the advantages of having the external evaluation is that it's given us the first chance to do an in-group analysis and to look at data a lot of different ways and look at different factors. So we actually are excited about that, and we
Yes.
talked about how this gives us an opportunity to dig even deeper into how our ELLs are doing. So thank you.
If we go to the next slide, and we now disaggregate current and former ELLs, we see that, remember, the goal for all students is to exit programming. We want all students within now a threshold has been defined for us of 5 years to be able to exit out of programming. So what we can see is that there is a marked difference between the current ELLs and the former ELLs, to the point that former ELLs outperform students who were never ELLs on mandatory grade tests. So there certainly is an advantage to exiting from ELL services. That ELL performance decreases through the years through 8th grade. And so one of the recommendations from Cal is that we do disaggregate so we can get this type of insight within the group. Another area to look at is the reclassification rates. We know that the goal for all students is to exit from services, and we see that there are slight fluctuations from year to year in reclassification. And the data in the full report, you will be able to see that there's a slight or bigger drop in the 17-18 year. That's the year when there was a change in the classification criteria. But what we can see is that there are subgroups of English language learners for whom exiting takes longer. Students who are considered low income take 1.5 longer to exit from ELL services. And within the demographic subgroup, Hispanic students take 1 year longer than the rest of ELL students. Also, long-term ELLs, as I said, now it's defined as if students aren't exiting from services within the first 5 years, they can now be classified as long-term ELLs. It's important to note that half to 3/4 of ELLs in grades 6 to 12 have now been reclassified as long-term ELLs. Between half and 3/4. And that once you become a long-term ELL, the likelihood of also being identified for special education services increases.
And what portion of our total is?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm curious because there's so many, we have a lot of new board members and people
Sure.
that not necessarily understanding like changing classifications and other things. I'm wondering if it's around terminology and for better understanding, otherwise people are going to not catch
Right.
pieces. Is that okay for
Yeah.
us to?
Yes, absolutely.
dance?
Absolutely.
Okay, yes. So Kate, go ahead. Go ahead.
So between half, at each grade level, between half and 3/4 of current ELLs who are still receiving services are also long-term ELLs. So after 6th grade, because they've already been in continuous services through 5th grade, now if they haven't exited by then, they are now identified as long-term ELLs.
So, in other words, in a classroom of ELs, the majority, or more than the majority of EL English learner students are long-term.
Yes.
They have not yet receiving services. That's a good question. Thank you.
Now, this next set of data is about data around Spanish language data, and it of course refers to students enrolled in bilingual programs. So the CAL group identified that there's limited data available with regards to partner language assessment data. We can explain that in the sense that we have had a staggered implementation of our Spanish language assessment. We use a software called Achieve 3000 that allows us to measure students' biliteracy levels in both Spanish and English, but we had to implement it a few grades at a time. In the next few years, we will have a full picture of how students are developing through between our PALS data and the Achieve 3000 data. We will have a full set of K through 8th grade level data around Spanish literacy levels. But in general, we know that at the K2 level, students are meeting grade level benchmarks for literacy, with a larger proportion of those students being English speakers within dual language immersion programs. And at the middle school levels, you can see that there's a majority of students that are at the minimal level. So the recommendation for this area is that we continue to utilize Spanish language assessments to better be able to understand the Spanish language outcomes in bilingual programs.
And this was also an outcome that we found in the comprehensive assessment system that we're working on, that we'll provide you with some updates on, as we found a real gap in the area of an authentic Spanish language, really even formative assessments. We're relying very heavily on English standardized assessments, so that we know we have some work to do in that area as well.
I'm sorry, Nikki, you still have?
Just also on the Spanish, same thing as in English, could we please get a nonverbal assessment if possible? Because those students may very well be proficient, they just can't speak.
So the next section is about each of those sections of the plan, and each section is formatted the same way, with a set of successes, some challenges for that area, and another slide with the recommendation. So for the sake of time, I will highlight one of them, but when you ask questions, just let me know what questions you have in general. So the first section is the ELL communications and monitoring system. The main success is to have adopted web-based data systems to be able to track over time historical data around the services that English language learners receive. We had to move from one system to another. We have adopted a new system that will allow us to give us better reports so that we can monitor data district-wide over time. The key recommendations in this area are certainly to make sure that staff have a voice into improving our ways for distributing and collecting these forms. This is all about family engagement, and so certainly we want to make sure that we're being responsive to both staff and families' needs. And then another area would be that staff have reported the need for more interpreters in our schools. The next section is the professional learning and building system capacity. So some of the successes are that we have provided an array of resources for schools. In general, there has been some limited opportunities to engage in additional learning with staff. So recommendations for this section is to ensure that we provide professional learning for all teachers of ELLs. English language learners are enrolled in all of our schools, and that we continue to expand programs like GLAD and QTEL that have been well received overall. The next section of the plan refers to English as a second language services. And remember that all ELLs, regardless of whether they're in mainstream in English or in bilingual programs in 2 languages, they are entitled to these ESL services. And the key areas here there are classroom observations that they conducted show that the use of many successful practices district-wide. And among the challenges, we need to provide greater support for students with limited formal education and long-term ELLs. So some key recommendations in this area is to continue to provide to teachers professional development and curricular guidance, to target improvements around long-term ELLs, to provide supports around social emotional well-being. And then from this section, I would highlight that targeting professional development around the development of academic language is critical for all students.
You'll see that in the slides where Sylvia talked and pulled out former ELLs, current ELLs, where she pulled out the never ELLs, those 2 charts. As you saw those slopes go down, what that tells us is that we have an opportunity, particularly at later elementary and middle, to target on academic language and teaching that is language attentive. So that's one of the opportunities we see in that slope that is declining, which we want to see disrupted and going the other way.
For bilingual education services, some key successes are that there continues to be enthusiasm around and commitment to dual language programs and developmental bilingual programs through various MMSD stakeholders. And that classroom observations showed some implementation of model practices. Some challenges continue to be the shortage of qualified bilingual staff, even as we transitioned from a 90-10 to a 50-50. So some key recommendations is to continue focusing on the hiring of bilingual certified staff and to continue to provide systematic professional development and coaching. Yes? Yes?
Just a quick question. We bring in some teachers from Spain on this, and that how are we gonna grow our own program so that we can start training our own teachers?
Yeah, so one of the areas of building capacity has been to provide tuition reimbursement to teachers in our district. We have had about 44 teachers who have gone through the program and have obtained their licenses. We have about 16 teachers who are still enrolled and pursuing their teaching licenses.
Very cool.
And then the next section of the plan was around diversity in bilingual programs. Some key successes have been that our efforts to increase diversity in the district are commendable. We have made improvements. However, some challenges that have been identified by stakeholders is the current lottery system, and in order to address that, to consider whole school design as well as one-way immersion options. And some key recommendations in this area is to continue to work with school-based staff and involve stakeholders in all of these efforts to make sure the community at large understands where programs are offered, and then to continue to focus on the recruitment of diverse staff for GLI from diverse backgrounds. The last section of the plan refers to community building. Some successes about that include that some schools are very much engaged in these efforts of promoting equity and increased collaboration between strands, but not in all. But some inroads have been made. So the key recommendation in this area, one recommendation is to continue to use school community building practices while adopting a more active role in implementing these policies and practices. So to conclude, you will be receiving a full report that goes much more in detail than the executive summary that you've received by late September. We will work with the community in both the school-based community and the community at large in dissemination activities through December of this year. And then we will develop a new plan during spring and present it to you, a new 5-year plan in September of 2020.
Thank you, Sylvia and Lisa. At this point, you like for us to scrutinize this
Yes.
and really
Yep.
be direct. Okay.
Yes,
I
yes.
just want to make sure that we're clear.
Of course.
I wanted to open the floor for questions or clarifications. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's several areas in which I see kind of just holes in data that I think is available to us. So I was really surprised to see that discipline data isn't reflected, or am I missing discipline data?
Discipline, it wasn't very much a focus. In general, it's been because as a subgroup, ELLs isn't a group that has high discipline data, for example, that triggers
I think that's
discipline data.
actually more of a reason to have the data, right? If we're constantly talking about disproportionality and discipline in terms of youth of color, then if this subgroup of students, for whatever reason, is less likely to experience, being suspended or sent out of class, that's something that we should have kind of a thorough understanding of and would be really useful in terms of the kind of entire scope of our work. Another piece of data that I was kind of surprised to see wasn't reflected, although me and Andrew had talked about this, is the ability for young people to maintain skills in their first language, right? So are we measuring simultaneously as kids acquire English, their ability to continue learning in their first language or other languages, and our overall understanding of our kids kind of trading in their ability to speak one language for another in early childhood, and why would we not treat speaking multiple languages, no matter what the language you speak is, as an asset throughout your education? And so those were some things that kind of jumped out at me. The other thing that I thought was interesting is in terms of talking about point of entry for ELLs. So some kids are going to enter our schools at the age of 5, other kids are going to enter at the age of 13, and I would imagine that makes a tremendous difference
Yes.
in terms of a young person's ability to acquire
Yeah.
language.
Yes, that data
Thanks,
was
Andrew.
provided and considered.
Thank you very much.
I can at least provide comments on the first two that you had. One is the inclusion or exclusion of behavior data or graduation data or anything that could be in this evaluation. It's important to put a frame around this and a scope around this, that is the review of the plan itself. So it is really about the implementation of the plan, the terms in the plan that we had set out to do as the highest priority. And it is much, much less about the performance of the students that benefit from that plan. So there are a couple of different options then. One is that we do provide behavior data in a lot of different venues, and if there's a curiosity then about behavior data, particularly for ELLs or more nuanced investigation around ELLs, then that might be an environment to do that. The other is any plan that you think needs to address a particular aspect of student outcomes during the drafting of that new plan, as this one will move on to the next phase for the next school year to be implemented the following, is maybe there is then a body of work around that particular outcome that needs to be added to the plan itself. So it's, so that one is the consideration of the frame around plan evaluation is how well the plan itself is being
Yeah, so
implemented.
really looking at the fidelity of the plan
Yeah.
and using students as
Yeah.
a way to demonstrate fidelity to
Yeah.
the plan.
Yeah, so there are ways to get at those outcomes, those other types of outcomes for students that benefit from ELL services, just as special ed services and so on. And if it needs to be baked into the next edition of a plan, then that's part of the redrafting process. Yeah. And then the first, so I think that was the first one. The second one then around retaining and continuing to grow original language or partner language proficiency. That's a capacity that's going to grow as we do get better Spanish language proficiency assessment instruments, as well as other languages. But I think we're at even nationally, the start of that edge. But there's definitely a need, and it's always been a curiosity of mine.
I think the risk that we're talking about, if we're saying we're going to develop that long term and we're not measuring it in the meantime, is that we're sending kids to school and we're running the risk of young people losing skills at school. And I don't think that that is an option. We want to, we want to sleep on, or we want to wait to get better. And so I think we have to both be able to know whether or not that's happening, and then we need to address it accordingly. And so I think that's an area of emphasis for me moving forward.
Yeah, definitely some urgency there, and definitely curiosity for me too. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, y'all.
Just reminded you that that Chris is on the phone.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I emailed Sylvia yesterday to prepare like a package of data that intersects with free reduced lunch and IEPs, and
Thank you.
also looking at what are the top 3 to 5 languages of the English learners, so we have a better picture of. So I have Gloria, but Chris, I want to just open to you if you have any questions. We don't forget you.
Do we still have Chris?
Chris, unmute your computer.
She might be. Okay. I'll wait for her and.
Sure, mine won't take very long. My question is around the culture and climate around, particularly around the long-term ELL.
Yeah.
And so, my concern is obviously the high percentage of long-term ELL, and how they don't transition out, and, the challenges around that, right? But, from my experience, really just seeing it firsthand in our schools, particularly our high schools, it seems very isolated, almost experience, right? It's hard to describe. It's not like I'm trying, I'm saying that it's not supported by the district, the high school administrators necessarily, but I feel like there's a sense of not knowing what to do with those students, right? And I look at it as similar to dual language, right? Where we have our students who speak a different language and are start really young, and they do really well because they bring something of value to dual language, right? To that school, right? People who believe in their language and their culture. And I believe that's missing within our high schools. I feel it. I have spoken to a lot of ELL classes over the years, and I still feel it. And I'm just wondering if there's anything, and maybe I've missed it, like what is it? There are consultants, like do they measure that
Yeah.
impact?
Yeah, so in the ELL plan itself, we do identify the areas of improvement specifically at the high school level. When the plan was drafted, the legislation around long-term ELLs hadn't been approved. Now it's very evident that that's something that's happening. So from the beginning, we set out to work with high schools to ensure that both that there are systems in place that identify which students who are newcomers need to be in shelter courses, what set of courses need to be offered in a sheltered format, and where are students going to be placed in the so-called mainstream of courses, and how can we ensure that more and more of those teachers of content areas are duly certified so that they can implement the type of instruction that's engaging and that develops academic language. Certainly that's an area that will continue to be a focus for us.
Yeah, a little color commentary to that. I know Sylvia and her team worked really hard with one of our high schools this year and their department chair to really take a look at who students were that needed services in what content area. And it was about helping that high school team figure out how to best use their time, their people, and their money to support students with those needs. And they did a really deep dive around what kinds of students and what leveled students were in English or math or social studies, and then what kind of support was in those classes. Or we found that there were some classes where there were ELL students and there was no support. So it's literally that kind of attention to knowing who the kids are, being thoughtful around scheduling and making sure you have a certified person. And right, high school is a little more challenging, particularly for dual language, because you need someone who is both bilingual and certified in the content area. So it's really, you guys actually aren't going to say it here, but I'm going to say it for you. You worked really hard with that one high school to take a look at how schedules were constructed. And in some cases, we identified with the principal that it wasn't going to be fixed all in 1 year. Like, the principal actually had a multi-year plan to get certified people in certain content areas. Like, the principal wanted to get certified people in English, so she was working on getting just 2 classes with duly certified people, and then she was going to hire another one the next year. So it really is about sort of the now, how are we using our teachers, and also having a plan for moving forward. How do you get more teachers either duly certified or bilingual?
Yeah.
And so just a follow-up
Yeah.
question quick. So where are we losing our students? Are these students who are just arriving? I mean, do we have the data on, are they transitioning through our school system and then struggling in high school, or just have continued to struggle middle and high school, or?
Yeah, the vast majority of our students haven't been enrolled in our district
Okay.
since kindergarten.
All right. Thank you.
And we
So,
work,
1 second, yeah.
yeah, and we work really extremely hard on the belief that students who are English language learners are capable of engaging in this learning. And here's how, and here is, let's engage together in learning how to do that.
Great,
So let's
thank you.
get Chris' voice,
Yeah.
because she's queued in to speak with us. Go ahead, Chris.
Chris? Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Now is it off? Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
That's
Okay, excellent. So I'm having a lot of sound issues here, so if I'm asking questions that I got asked, I apologize.
Go ahead.
Go ahead and ask all your questions at once, okay?
Okay, so that was one. Another one is, I'm just kind of curious, what we're doing to meet the unique needs of special education students and advanced learners who are English language learners. I'm wondering if we have the data on graduation rates at this point for our ELLs. And I'm wondering if, when we get the evaluation, we can get the data disaggregated for DLI, DBE, and ESL, just so that we can see how the different programs are performing.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Yes, so thank you for those questions. Yes, the rate of acquisition that we shared in the ELL plan was an average of 10.5 years, which is much too long, and that's why we have the half to three-fourths of students who are long-term ELLs. I am going to have to go back and get back to you to see if the new rate was calculated or not in the full plan. And in terms of advanced learners and special education, we work closely with those two departments, with our special education department and our advanced learning team, to ensure that in all of their work that they're looking at the ELL subgroup. And then graduation rates are certainly available. That's available data. It's lower than the general, but increasing and improving. We, of course, are interested in not just the graduation, but really college and career readiness and preparedness for after secondary life.
The most recent graduation data we have is the class of 18, and our four-year graduation rate by ELLs is 82%, which is the same rate as our non-ELLs. So those 2 points have come together for the first time.
Excellent.
And then there was a question around DLI, DBE, and ESL. Data.
Okay, I think in general, ELLs, a lot of the data has been analyzed for all ELLs regardless of program. And then there's certain data that's specific to DLI, for example, comparing by literacy acquisition in Spanish and English that's specific to DLI programs.
Yeah, I have a few board members. Were you going to make a comment?
Well, I was just going to say, I wanted to make sure that you knew that our new chiefs were here tonight. And I don't know if, Mike and Tremaine and Carletra, but I don't know if you want Mike to have some input into the high school questions or not.
Something that all the high schools right now have been focusing on is 9OT, and I think that you guys know about the 9th grade on track. And I think if you start looking at the 9OT data, the trends on this, that what we are also seeing is that through that work, students are leaving 9th grade now, and we began looking at comparison data as they left 8th grade, where those students are at the end of 9th grade as well. And we've seen a nice trend as well on this, so they're leaving with 5.5 credits and rolling through as well. So that's been a positive. And as well as the partnership that we have been doing with UW of really trying to focus on hiring dual-certed, so that the experiences that our ELL students have in high school aren't limited because we're limited at what classes certified teachers are at. And that's something that is extremely important, so we're seeing attendance as well going up.
And then I have Kate, and then Ali, and then Sadie.
I have maybe just two kind of high-level comments. I think maybe this is an error on our own scheduling's part, but it might have been easier or more productive to have this discussion once we have the report. I think a lot of the questions, hopefully the data questions that we're missing, the kind of insights around specific cohorts, specific demographics, kind of how are we doing by our kids hopefully will be in there.
Yes.
So just, we had this discussion, I think, next week on how we want to schedule the next year. So let's all remember, let's make sure to schedule these after we get the report. I just, I think that some of the behavior climate, hopefully some of those questions are addressed. And then the second comment is around the question that we asked the evaluators for. So, Andrew, I appreciated your point that what we asked for was for our external evaluators to answer, did we do what we said we were going to do in the plan? For me, that's a little bit lacking in terms of the insight that I would hope to have as a board around, are we doing right by our ELL kids? And how's the best way for us to support them and accelerate that progress? So I would guess it's a little late for this cycle, but again, we can do something internal that says, tick the box, did we do what we said we were going to do? Check, check, check. If we're going to hire someone outside, I'd love to ask them and use their skills to do a deeper dive around, help us think through, what does DLI mean, and do we want to expand it, shrink it? How does it impact buildings? Like, what's the best way to support that whole method of learning, which is only one, right? How do we think through, there's just a lot of other questions that I think you're hearing from a lot of us that we would be really eager to listen to. This is the biggest single cohort of children of any of the kind of tracked cohorts that we have. And it's an important one and a growing one for us to continue to evolve our educational practices for. And those questions, it sounds like we didn't ask the evaluator, which is fine. We got a lot of the knowledge and insight ourselves, but the next time we have this conversation, I'd love to bring some of those questions into it.
No, I appreciate that. And I think you will gain more insights, not just on the implementation of the plan, but on programs overall in the full report. Yes. Thank you.
So I just want to, sorry, Ali, 1 second. I just want to echo and elevate Kate's voice, because you said much nicer things that I was thinking about. My daughter is a former English learner, and according to this, a long term. And I'm not necessarily seeing bold recommendations. I'm really expecting bolder recommendations. I also, from the report, just from anecdotal conversations, and I have worked close with you and Teresa, didn't see like anything that either of you would not know otherwise, right? Like it maybe you needed this report to say, see, this is the thing that we've been saying that, is happening. I was specifically disappointed around how teachers and other staff were unaware of things, especially when we talk about Black excellence and trying to elevate Black excellence. For me, having Black excellence and not having awareness of English learners, I don't understand how we're reconciling with that. Yes, I'll leave it this way. But Ali and
So I'm wondering if you can take us back to the slide that is professional learning, building capacity. Key recommendations, provide PDs to teachers, ELLs. I think some demographic information around teachers would actually be really informative. So how are we employing folks who were English language learners, folks who speak multiple languages, folks who who English is not their first language, and is there a disparity in terms of, are we hiring more English speakers who speak language like Spanish as a second language, or are we hiring more Spanish speakers who speak English as a second language, and what are the implications of that within our hiring practices? I thought the recommendations were fascinating in terms of the GLAD training and kind of these more like PD, very kind of specific to the program itself, and then looking at kind of key results and areas of success and challenges. I, again, thought those were very specific to the program itself and not necessarily giving us kind of the full scope of the district. And so any supplementary information that can be provided that is housed internally, I think would be deeply helpful. And then I think greater understanding of how we're developing educators and ensuring that folks are certified and making sure that that group is diverse, right? So, how African American students fit into dual lingual immersion is a concern, I think, of most of us around the table. And I think, you know, that there's some really interesting framework in terms of how we're looking at disparities. So, you know, if the students of color who are the most likely to be successful in our schools are the students who are speaking multiple languages, how does that inform us, and what are we actually holding against students? And that actually takes us into a more nuanced conversation about what it means to be a child of color in our district. So I'd hope that we would see that fleshed out to a greater extent. I'd also hope that we'd see a reflection in terms of diversity amongst our staff that are achieving dual language certifications and, you know, working with an incredibly diverse group of young people. So I think these trainings are fascinating, and I think they're not reflective of kind of the larger certification pieces and the diversity and demographics of educators we're talking about. And I'd love to have greater access to that information.
I was concerned and curious to know that the system for distributing the ELL individualized students plans to parents, because we aren't making that contact to the homes, and you know, our you know, education plans, you know, reflective of maybe dialectical diversity within languages, and if that's a challenge for these students.
So the individual plans of service are both a compliance measure as well as an instructional support. Parents need to know every year what the services for their students are. Past practice, prior to me taking this position, the practice was to mail that IPS form through a letter, and we didn't know if they received it or not. We changed that practice by having teachers connect with parents and have face-to-face conversations about the content of the forms. So definitely it has been a change in cultural practices, the way we do things with families, and we think we are much better off today than we were in the past. But certainly as students are going or getting to, say, the high school level, Midland High School level, where parents might have more sporadic visits to schools, teachers are finding it more challenging to have those face-to-face conversations. So that's what we're continuing to work with them about. What are ways that we engage families? Are there yellow parent nights? What are ways that we can have to make sure that our families understand the content, and if they disagree, they can have a productive conversations with teachers.
Nikki?
I know we're supposed to tell them once a year, but once a year is too late. Oftentimes, by the time you realize that the student is behind, they're going to lose almost a year of education. Is there a way that we can have a check-in, if we can have a 6-month check-in or a quarterly check-in? Because if we're wanting to see the success of the numbers, notifying someone once a year, kind of basically write off that entire year.
Yes.
And I worry about that.
Yeah, so the requirement is once a year, specifically from a legislative point of view, but we understand that it's important that teachers connect with parents around their outcomes and performance of their students on a more regular basis, and that English language learners and their parents are entitled to all of the communications about their performance that all other students receive. This is a very specific document that teachers then need to use during the year to provide services and support.
Yeah, in other words, this is the minimum that we're supposed
Correct.
to be doing, Nikki,
Okay.
and we're barely making that.
Yeah, I can see
Right?
that. Yeah,
So-
and that's what's kind of upsetting me.
And this is not a
It's
reflection.
not you, it's not you guys
on
that
the
I'm upset.
G&E or
No.
other staff is how we needed to frame this work. I will say, Sylvia, thank you so much. I can't imagine having your entire program scrutinized the way it has been.
You
I
did
hope
great.
that it's gonna catapult
Yes.
to really specific and target recommendations. And I would say that I'm really excited with this board because so many of us have had different, either directly or indirectly, have received specific services from the district. So we know firsthand what is it like to receive services or receive minimal services or not receive services. So I think that the conversation, the sharpness of the conversation is very different than 4 years ago. This is not on the previous board. It's just that I think that folks around this table are very much aware of how we have systematically neglected large portion of our youth and what we need, like the time to really make bold decisions to accelerate the progress. Gloria?
Yeah, thanks, Ananda. I mean, I think it's just following up my initial question. I think we need to send a strong message to our schools, right? That this is a priority, that it is about changing the culture and the climate around ELL. From the ground to the administrative level. I mean, I just feel like we have historically have sent kids through our educational system, and we're losing them. And I think it is we can change, all these recommendations, great, right? But if we're not changing the culture and the priority and sending a strong message to our schools that our ELL students are valued, and this is how consistently we are going to spread and support our ELLs. And I know you mentioned that there was a specific school that you tweaked and you looked at it carefully. I would like to see that and actually shared with the board at that level, right? I mean, particularly when it comes to budget and policy decisions, that is what I would like to see here, right? What is it that's going to work with our ELL students? What is working? What's not? And so that we can inform policies and budgets moving forward, right? Because it is, I think we have to make it a priority at the board level. I've just seen this over year after year, and it's not to the fault of any one particular thing. It's just a new phenomenon. It's a culture, not a new phenomenon. It's a culture change that takes a long time, and we didn't get here overnight.
Right.
So
I appreciate those comments. Thank you.
I have a couple more comments.
Yeah.
One is curious, or questions, I guess. Do we have, there is a mention, and we didn't talk much about that, of dedicated training to support English learners. Are we addressing that this next school year?
Yes. Yes. It's always dependent on, of course, the level of collaboration, but absolutely that has always been the case where this has to be at the universal level.
Specifically, we're working with the coach professional development to inform how coaches are interacting and supporting teachers at their schools around academic language development and really strategies to support ELLs and ESL students at schools. So that's one of the ways that we are, that's a major equity strategy, is to, implement high quality, standards-based curriculum that forwards the growth and development of academic language. We just sent the team of 14 folks to the Standards Institute in Los Angeles, and it wasn't standards for English speakers. It was standards for all speakers, English language learners, students with special education needs, that we can't forego the expectation of providing students with grade level academic content and vocabulary. Oftentimes I think we scaffold lessons and we scaffold instruction to the point where our students don't have an opportunity to have dialogue using grade level vocabulary. So that's something that we'll be pushing in on with instructional coaches this year as well.
So there was that piece and the piece around hiring. That would be good to have. Like, what is baseline? What has happened in the last 3 years or 2 years, whatever, how many years? And then what is being proposed for next year and what is the vision? Like, what is the thing that, the next question was around the lottery, because you mentioned the lottery is going to be revised. Can you talk a little bit about that? Can you just also give like what is current for lottery, and then move into like what's the revision?
Yes, so we've shared that data with you. You'll be receiving it. This year, all the schools that have dual language immersion programs, except Leopold, had to use a lottery because there were more applicants than seats available.
Both Spanish speakers and native English speakers?
Yes, yes. So, not so much native Spanish speakers in the attendance area, but maybe out of attendance area, or English speakers, non-ELLs, never ELLs, yeah. So I think we determine a number of seats at each school based on the number of English language learners that are Spanish speakers. And then in general, what has happened is that it doesn't provide universal access at any given school, except Nuestro Mundo is the only whole school that shares an attendance area with Frank Alice Elementary School. And so, since there are more applicants than seats available, a lottery has had to be enacted in all but one, except one school.
And then what is the revision recommendation as mentioned? We're gonna get more information on that?
So the recommendations are to continue to look at the availability of seats, the availability of combining attendance areas, considering whole schools, considering offering not just dual language, two-way immersion programs, but one-way immersion programs at different sites. So there are a number of options that we could use to provide greater access to dual language programs.
And then any particular strategy, either at a school level or district-wide, around, because one of the concerns was when the lottery, you have African-American Black families competing with white native English families for the same small number of slots.
Right.
Therefore,
and the proportions, the percentages are very different.
Yeah,
so at a
exactly.
given school, 40% of the white applicant, so the white applicant might be at the 40%. The demographic of African American at that school might be 20%. And so even at similar application ratios, you're going to have double, triple the number of applicants of one subgroup going into a random lottery, and therefore the outcomes are predictable.
Yeah.
So we have to move into a completely different framework in order to remove the lottery from this, the setup by either implementing whole schools and giving greater access.
So just to mention that.
Wait for the microphone to get to you, Teresa.
So I just wanted, I'm not very good at talking this thing. Okay. I just wanted to mention that there's been an enormous amount of outreach to families. The schools themselves, as well as our office, we pick up to make sure, and we have databases of every single incoming potential 5K kid. And there is individual contact made with every single incoming family. And that doesn't include like a letter, it doesn't count, or nor does just like a message left. We have to have like human to human contact to make sure families are aware of the options that are available. And so one of the things that happened at Leopold this year, we worked like we always have. We kept working on that outreach. But in addition, we funded as a pilot African American parent of children in the DLI program to work with us also in outreach to families. And then the other thing that we did was because the section numbers of kids didn't
we didn't need to go to lottery. Every internal candidate that applied got in. And so what that resulted in fact, was that the diversity, the demographic diversity between English classrooms and the Allied classrooms as of June were actually mirrors for the first time in like 9 years at Leopold. So I think that there will still be some shifts at that because of the late move-ins to some degree, but not going to lottery, which we were able to do because of the number of sections needed and compared to applicants, had a significant impact on the diversity of the groups. So
I'm so glad we got this on record.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Just to make a comment on the comment on full school DLI. I mean, we're relatively far off topic at this point, but I mean, it's certainly an area of interest for me. There's a lot of scheduling and cost efficiencies that come with that type of model, as well as some whole building climate potential benefits, and it removes some of the complexity of the kind of work that is being done around outreach and avoiding lottery. There's a lot of work being done to counterbalance the effect of kind of the two schools within a school. So it's just a comment for when we're ready to talk about it.
Thank you, Kate. Any final comments? Anything
No,
else? Sylvia?
just
Okay.
thanking all of you for your attention to this detail, and the full report will be available to you by the end of September, and we can have another conversation digging deeper into that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next we have the review cycles. And, okay. Andrew, is that you that's presenting?
Okay.
No,
Ready to
so,
move forward?
I realize that I should have mentioned every time somebody comes in, especially new staff, to introduce themselves.
Yeah.
Can you please say Teresa's name and what her role was?
So that was Teresa Carranza. She is our coordinator of dual language immersion programming. And I was with her when we realized we did not need the lottery at Leopold. And I cannot begin to tell you the joy that was expressed around that table. I just want you, I first of all appreciate the questions you're asking because they allow us to surface the real human stories that come with this. And that was really a powerful moment when we realized we did not need to use the lottery and we had a couple options for programming at Leopold. So yeah, there's something there that we have to grab onto as we move forward.
Thank you for making that move.
Yeah. Okay, so Andrew and I are going to talk a little bit, just for a short bit, about the updated evaluation cycle and scaling document. And I'm just going to call out, first of all, the 3 big changes that are on here. And then if we have questions or anything else that we want to talk about technically, Andrew's here to answer this. So first of all, I'd like to call out that the first change that was made on the document is actually on page 2 around the annual data reporting that we share with you periodically throughout the year. And based on some of the conversations we had last month at the board meeting and ongoing conversations that I'm sure we'll have this year, we added the at-risk monitoring report to our annual data reporting routines for the year. So you'll see that on the upper chart there, and you will get that typically October or November. It's probably November you will get that data. There are multiple data warehouses that require data cleaning around attendance, grade point average, so on and so forth. So that will be coming to you annually, and we wanted to reflect that level of importance on this. Also on the next page, page 3, you'll see the refreshed 5-year cycle for all of our major plans. So this cycle reflects the fact that we are moving off of a 3-year cycle. We're moving to 5, And we know that as humans in a school district, we are really only capable of doing one evaluation a year and one rewrite a year. So you're living through with us the first external evaluation of the English Language Learner Plan. We will spend a year rewriting. We will come back to you at the end of the year and in the summer with drafts, so on and so forth. You can imagine if you had more than one of those to talk about during a cycle with all of the other work that we have to do. So as you can see, this reflects, if you follow over with your finger on the English Language Learner Plan, then in 5 years, in the fall of 2024, we'll be undergoing the same cycle again. It is important to note that plans that have not yet gone through a second or the first 3-year cycle, they are still on a 3-year cycle. So special education right now, I'm working with John Harper to do the RFP for an evaluation. Right now, we're doing that. Next year, at this time, I'll be working with the new Director of Advanced Learning to do that RFP. So those might feel quick, but they're on the first original 3-year cycle. Those won't get bumped to 5-year until after the next evaluation. So that's the second big change on this. And then if you take a look at the partnership renewals on page 4, we have amended this chart to add the fall of 2024, which basically extends that whole cycle out of MOA reevaluations one more year into the cycle. And then the back pages of this simply reflect our commitment and our language around scaling and piloting and our process for validating. So I'll stop there. The big changes we're adding at risk, adding the 5-year cycle for the external evaluations, and also then adding another year onto our partnership renewals. So I'll pause for questions or any commentary from Andrew.
Just an introduction to make it formal. So, Executive Director of Research Accountability, Andrew Statz. So we have the enrollment office, the assessments, standard assessments. The research team does work like this, and we've also got the innovation team on my department. So pleased to meet you officially.
Kate? So 2 comments. One's quite tactical. The advanced learning plan that we passed has our evaluation and plan update year as this current academic year, 2019-2020. That was based on a 3-year cycle from the original path. The plan that was passed was from 17 to 2020. So I think there's maybe we're not all synced up on what that cadence looks like. In here, it looks like it's 21, 22.
The Advanced Learner Plan, I'm remembering some of the ambiguity here because I believe the plan was simply referring to years, but not school years in particular. So there was some confusion as to what that actually accounted for.
I mean, the picture is in the plan. Looks like academic years.
Yeah, I mean,
2018 to 2000, or 2019 to 2020.
yeah, so the way that we're
So we
reflecting
have
this
that
now to say that the fall 2021 for the Advanced Learner Plan will include results from the 2020-2021 school year.
Which is a postponement of between 1 and 2 years, depending on how you count that. And I think I just heard you say we were sticking with the 3-year cycle for the plans that hadn't been through that yet. So
Yeah, I was confused by that as well.
this looks like we've shifted it to a 5-year cycle to me versus that 3-year cycle. And we can talk about whether that's the right thing to do, but we should at least talk about it. Like the plan that was passed does have a date for the next evaluation, and the date is very clear. We've postponed a number of advanced learning discussions this year, including one on earned honors, which we've agreed to not proceed with further expansion of earned honors before having a discussion at the board around what that would look like from a curricular perspective and a scheduling perspective. So there are a number of discussions that we are, by board agreement, waiting on, right? Decisions that we are waiting on. And I this is the second largest demographic of all of these demographics that we're talking about. So it's not one that I would like to wait on. The current message in schools is we don't have an AL plan, so we can't proceed. I've heard that numerous times from many of our staff. And so if we're going to postpone the evaluation cycle for that plan, I think that should be a board discussion around postponing it.
Should be a board vote.
So that was comment one. My other comment is just, it would be great if the board could participate in the writing of questions for the evaluations. So we just hired someone, and it would have been really nice to participate in kind of scoping out what the questions are asked, so that we get the full value from an external consultant, and make that maybe a little more expansive than like a compliance discussion.
Yeah, we'll start with the last one first. So what I anticipate is the board saying, yeah, that's a good idea. To soften the language in here that's about evaluations referring to the implementation of the plan itself. So that by changing some language in here, that would allow you to then scope that in a larger way to see who would apply and what that may do for timelines and cost. So right now, it's simply stating that our evaluations are around plan implementation. If you wanted to expand that to be success with the student group, or I heard a description of like, the strategies in general and appropriateness and role and that kind of thing. So just by making a change to this document would then set you up to have a bigger scope conversation about what those evals look like. Like I said, to see who's interested, what they would do for time, and what they would do for potential costs. For the first piece, in terms of timing, I'm starting to see what you're saying. So the rhythm that we've established does get you to a 5-year cycle on all of the major plans. The reason for that, and this body can decide that it truly wants to have more than one in a year, is because we do have some capacity limitations. Even though these are external evaluations, there's a great deal of work done by the program staff as well as the research staff to pull the evidence together to do an evaluation. This would be doubling it up for next year. The other issue is then following that with the plan rework. So you're going to be updating a plan, and then the following year we would be updating 2. So the input processes would then also be doubled, unless you were waiting a year from one eval for whatever reason to then do your plan update. Also costs. Lisa has a better idea of costs than I as they come out of her budget, but about $150,000, so you would be doing $300,000 worth in 1 year. So it's a matter of pacing for capacity, for engagement for the board, engagement for the community, and cost.
I mean, I appreciate why it's easier to wait longer. I don't personally think that it's appropriate for us to pause on the discussion around how we want to accelerate supporting children in 5+ domains of talent and advanced learning. And I think that, our current OCR dialogue is going quite well, and we've been under compliance for a long time for how we've met the needs of advanced learners from our district, particularly advanced learners of color. We are waiting on decisions on how to structure high school and schedule high school as a result of our inability to have this discussion at the board level. So I think there's some urgency. I wouldn't be comfortable, I guess, waiting until 2022 in order to have a plan.
Can I just talk a little bit, sort of logistics around that? I know that there was sort of a 1-year advanced learning plan that we did before we did the approval of the second plan that's on the books now. So if you just look at the advanced learner plan that's reflected on page 3, so we're moving through this year with the current advanced learning plan. Next year at this time, we would be already inviting people in to evaluate. So by next year at this time, we're inviting people in to evaluate the plan. Because like the year before, the green box is actually when you do the evaluation. So in the fall of 2020, right, we're evaluating the plan. then we come with an evaluation report in the fall of 2021. If there is something that needs to drastically be changed between now and either the evaluation or when the new plan is written, we would certainly take that on ourselves and not feel as if we couldn't take steps. I know you know that already. I just wanted to be sure.
I appreciate that. I just,
yeah.
it is a difference from the plan we approved. If we're gonna change it, we should talk about it.
So I have a couple people on the stack, but I will say that there is the plan and there is the implementation. And there's the evaluation. So in between the time when the plan is written and the time we're waiting for the report evaluation, I think this board and this body has all the rights to get a progress in implementation. That does not mean that we'll have the more comprehensive report, because that's why we're paying the evaluators. And also that does not mean that we have to wait 3 more years to know whether this plan that just got passed is being implemented. And I have Ali, Nikki, and Gloria.
Yeah, so Kate, I think what I wanted to make sure wasn't happening is that we were kind of like talking past each other in terms of you're really advocating for the plan moving forward necessitating 2 evaluations in a singular year as of next year, because I felt that was what you addressed. The other thing is you said 5+ domains of advanced learners, and I'm wondering if you can be more specific to the additional domains beyond the 5 that are recognized coming.
I mean, the 5 I think are kind of your compliance-driven ones, right? Where they're state-defined. So, I mean, things like leadership and general intellectual are
the performing arts.
Right. They're probably broader than.
Okay.
That was kind of what I was. I mean, from a curriculum perspective.
I'm just saying, like, they're expansive categories, and so if there's an expansive category that you feel is not reflected,
I think
I'd like that
more,
to be named.
it's more curricular. No,
Okay.
It's more curricular.
And that being said, I want to just clarify for my own sake, talking about the evaluation and timeline of the plan, not adhering to the original kind of 3-year plan, and then becoming a 5-year plan before.
I think it's just a difference. The plan we approved had 2 in 1 year. That was what we were. That was when the board voted on this. That was the plan. Was for us to do 2 in 1 year.
And now we're saying we're scaling back to do 1 in a single year because of cost efficiency and capacity.
Lessons learned. Also, if I can add, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about the little orange boxes on here. So those are monitoring year updates. So we will be providing the board with with evidence on all 5 plans every year. It's just varying degrees of intensity. So the monitoring years are for each of the plans, and they do provide a narrative from the programs running that plan as to what they've done for the last year, lessons learned, what they may change for the following year, which really aligns to Lisa's observation that if something is off track, then we have those opportunities to change course. In addition, they will have results for that student group as it relates to strategic framework metrics, but then also very importantly, metrics that align specifically to the plans themselves. If you set out to do something around, for example, identification rates for advanced learners, that would be something featured. So it's those 3 pieces of evidence that this body would get every year for all plans, substituted on some years by the major plan evals done by Outside Works.
Ananda, you are right. In the move from a 3 to a 5, there's like a bridge year that happens between the evaluation and the writing of the new plan. And we actually did not account for that for the first time we did it. And in complete transparency, each of these plans was written with beginning and end date a little bit differently. Like some had calendar years, some had school years. So we have the observation was we have an opportunity to get that right this time through.
With lessons learned.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. I think there are some concerns around advanced learners, and I think we needed to figure out like what they are and how do we address them. I have Nikki and Gloria.
May I give some history? Kate and I were the 2 who were on the board when some of the advanced learner stuff first went down. So if I'm incorrect, Kate, please correct me. The problem with the advanced learner plan was the first one we were given wasn't a plan. And there was nothing that we could check off and no boxes that we could do. Then we managed to get a plan, and the reason why it would have escaped the cycle and done 2 in 1 year, which is what the vote was because it never was reviewed to begin with. And that's what I think Kate was referring to, was it never did get reviewed. What I'm worried about, and Kate and I don't always agree, but on this particular one we have to do, because I'm not just talking your typical everyday student. We have students with talent, who are black, brown, Latino, autistic, dyslexic, etc., in arts, in leadership, and we haven't looked at that process. And if we keep putting it off to another year or work on another year's data, I'm afraid those students are going to get lost because it has been put over before. I respect our team. I respect our research. I'm just trying to give the background information because I think it would help clarify some situations.
So let's hear from Gloria, and then Barb is looking to see if Chris has questions, and then Savian, and then maybe we'll do a round of like what's the recommendation for administration.
So, my train of thought on this is, I do agree that the 1 year, right? I mean, the 1 year doing an evaluation plan, a year is fair. I mean, I think it is a lot for the board and staff to do 2 in 1 year, so I'm in agreement with that. I almost see advanced learning similar to the discussion that we just had in ELL. In that, we get a report, right? It tells us what our experts in the field who are working in the field know already, right? It may give us a little bit, I'm not saying that we are all know-it-alls and we got it, right? But we have some great professionals out in their field, in our schools, who know what they're doing and know where the gaps are. And so as we are focusing on evaluation and studies and data, in the meantime, we are losing our students in the process. And I don't know, the evaluation is good, the report is good, I'm good with the 3 year and the 5 year, but what I want our staff recommendations on how we narrow the gap on some of these areas of concern, right? When I see advanced learning, I'm talking about like the gaps in Black excellence and our students of color, right? It seems like a doable sort of narrow focus that we could do almost internally, right? And so that's where I'm at on this. 3-5 years, that's great. I think it's important for us to have. It'll inform some of these decisions, but I really strongly feel that the information and the solutions are at the ground level and those who are at our schools. And so I would hope that in moving forward on this, that during the monitoring year, that we could actually have some discussions and some work happening on how do we break that gap on our students of color in advanced learning, right? Period. So. Yep.
So I want to check on Chris. Is she ready?
She is. There's a couple of seconds waiting time, so go ahead, Chris, when you're ready.
You guys hear me?
Yes.
So, I just had a couple of comments. The first is that it does look, as we talked about, in the first year of the project, we're going from a 3-year cycle to a 5-year cycle. And I'm just kind of wondering what the implications of that are for scaling the students. If we're making the decision
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, so last one first. We will take a look at the plans to see, especially this year, as we're beefing up those monitoring reports to make sure that those are including everything that the board would feel relevant and helpful, especially those ideas from the field, from program staff that may suggest shifts throughout the year. As a 3-year cycle or a 5-year cycle relates to scaling, the scaling process is independent of any sort of cycle or rhythm. So a scaling conversation, which you see starting on page 5 in this doc, just outlines the ways of working, taking an idea, making a determination if it's something we want to try. Do we have great confidence in it? And is that something that we want to try on a larger scale or a smaller scale? So that makes the difference between piloting. If it's a brand new emerging idea and we don't have certainty it's going to work, then it's a piloting situation and small. Or perhaps it moves right away to validation in that it's really a best practice. There's certain evidence elsewhere, or there's enough evidence in the research of the model itself that you should try it at kind of a medium scale. From that, then, you would end up with a larger scaling experience, and then it becomes a regular routine way of doing business that then fits into your regular rounds of process improvement. So that's why all of this document hangs together with a few apparently different topics. So as it relates to things that you might want to try in a plan, you could engage in that scaling process at any point. You could engage in it for a few months. You could engage in it for 3 weeks. You could engage in it for 3 years. But the key to the scaling process is whether or not you're taking the hard pause at a particular point in time to ask critical questions of what did you expect to have happen? Are you seeing the evidence that it is working? And what makes you think that it would expand and do well elsewhere? So the scaling process is something that we have outlined here only for district level efforts. So a lot of the things that we're thinking about capturing, for example, in a monitoring year update, that could be a change in practice, could be something that's completely organic. It may not be something that is sponsored at the senior team level or put in front of the board. So it exists independent of 3-year versus 5.
Andrew, just so I'm clear, what you're saying is that between the 5 years of the time of the implementation of the plan and the time we receive the report, there might be scaling happening all sort of ways as you would with any other. You don't wait for evaluation and the board to be scaling something that has been working.
Yeah, it's very important to maintain some responsiveness and some fluidity here. These are really complex systems. You want to know that something is working and change course as soon as you have the evidence to do that. That evidence, we should not necessarily wait for 5 years to see if it's working or not. These are decisions that we could be making in a very short period of time. And the annual review process gets you a window into it at least that frequently.
Sadie and Nikki.
Yeah, is there anything that we can do to increase the level of flexibility within a monitoring year? And then if we were to move the advanced learner plan up, it would kind of be on par with the special education plan for evaluation and updated. Are there things we can do so that they aren't always on the same track every 5 years? So, yeah.
I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. Are you asking, is it possible to move the advanced learner plan up a year without doing an annual monitoring update? Is that the question being asked?
Yeah, I think yeah.
The amount of work that the research team, for example, undertakes to get an annual monitoring report up and running is it's a light lift, and that's why we can carry off 3 or 4 of them in a year. Shifting then to a full evaluation is a much larger scope of work as it relates to identifying students, identifying dosage, combing through our data systems to get the right data to external evaluators. So it's not a one-to-one relationship as it relates to our team's capacity on the research team, their capacity. But it is additional cost. It is fielding 2 RFPs. Those are big undertakings that are months long. The work the board has to engage in to digest a plan, eval, and then following year then engage in plan adjustments. So I appreciate the question. It's not a one-to-one in terms of taking a pass on one gets you the other.
So Nikki, and I want us to start having conversations about like what do we want on the monitoring ears, because that should be the focus of the work.
This is actually one off, but I would request the chair's permission and latitude. The last board did vote on the advanced learner plan. I would request that a vote be taken on whether or not to follow the past board's vote, because nothing has nullified that vote. I feel that having it changed unilaterally disrespects the former board who made that decision, and I think that the new board has the right to weigh in on that decision. I therefore ask for it to be added to the vote at the board meeting at the end of the month, so that we can address that issue properly.
Just in response to that, Nikki, I think if this wasn't reflected, like if we're looking at how we're going to spend money, we're talking about multiple opportunities to weigh in, and I don't think any of those multiple opportunities are a way of being disrespectful to the past board. That being said, I guess that's up to us as a body. The other thing I just want to stress for kind of the following conversations that we have as we are talking about what's in review is that we have, of the 5 areas, there are 2 areas that we specifically, 5 areas that we have been, and 2 areas that we have been cited for long-term history. Thank you.
I always forget mine.
That I think that those are really relevant areas to examine.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Nikki.
Just need on your decision on the other thing.
Yeah, so is there another comment? Okay. So I think there are a couple things that I heard around let's talk about the advanced learner, but I think it's specifically around the monitor ears. One is what is in a report, what does it look like for monitoring and also evaluation being asked already, articulated in a report. I'm also heard around what is going to look like, what is the progress of continuous improvement is going to look like year by year on each of the plans. And I think prioritizing advanced learners, it seems like there's a lot of energy around the board on can we have this midterm continuous improvement report on advanced learners in order for us to honor what has happened in the past, what was the intentionality and the energy, and also to be responsive to our communities that have been waiting for a long time for implementation. I understand that there's also implications because the office has been in transition of staff, so there's a lot of that, but I'm curious if that would suffice the interest and the energy. So let me turn to Kate and Nikki first.
Kate, you want to go first?
All of us have a voice in what advanced learning means to the district. I mean, I think Gloria, you both have done a good job articulating, like, for me, that we need to use the year to move the work forward and not pause. And I have watched us time after time after time say, we'll kick this down the road. We didn't pass the advanced learning plan until more than 12 months after the start of the plan. Right, and that wasn't because we worked so hard on it, that was because we hadn't started. So we have kicked the can down the road on this discussion for years, and it is not okay. So we made one decision with the last plan, which was to change the method of identification. All of the subsequent decisions on curriculum for all 5 domains, for the role description for our advanced learning specialists, all of those were not made in that plan. And so the method of implementation was we'll do a few pilots to make those decisions, leave that up to our staff. We haven't even heard if the pilots have been done. So I would like to move the work forward, and I think there's a pressing need for curricular support in our schools that is easily accessible and available for teachers, as well as real clarity on what we want our advanced learning specialists to be doing. However we move the work forward, I'm good with, but again, like, it's probably like 7 conversations in 2 years I've watched us postpone.
That's why I had asked on the vote situation, because we've kicked it down the road so many times that I figure let's ask where we're at, because to be honest, we have kept kicking it down the road, and I keep getting emails, very nicely, very polite emails, from individuals of color and white who are saying, what is going on? Do we even have a plan? And I would like to be able to answer those with some fidelity.
So the other request, and I'll move to you all to share your thoughts and what you're thinking, is, so this next year is the English learner plan, updated plan, and the beginning of the evaluation of special ed. I'm wondering if for those 2 plans, and as we're looking at the data and the reports, if we can start triangulating that with advanced learners, right? When we're having progress monitoring for those 2 other plans, that if we can look at what does that mean for advanced learners. I think I'm 100% in agreement with the calendar. I do think that the bar is going to increase in regards to collaboration with interdepartmental collaboration, since one department will be doing the plan at a time. And I would like to see more of this. So now we're going to talk about special ed. So what about advanced learner and special ed? What about English learner and special ed? What about behavior and special ed? What's happening in all those levels? So, yeah. Any response?
I really think that's important. I mean, I sit down with John next week to look at developing his RFP, and I think that is really excellent feedback about taking a look at our other student groups in the major plans, and also triangulating that with whatever plan is up for study and external evaluation.
I think that's a good start. Here's my one problem, and I should have raised my hand, and I apologize for lack of that. But my one problem is this: that works great if you have a baseline. We don't have a baseline. And if we don't know what advanced learners is, what it comprises, what the baseline is, how do we know we're meeting it?
So you're saying that that's why you're
Yeah.
pushing for the evaluation?
That's
because you'd like
why.
to see the baseline?
Because I
How
need to
would
see a
you-
baseline on it.
What are your current mechanisms to identify a baseline for advanced learners?
We have a whole host of data on advanced learner students, our dashboard, our stat system, our annual evaluations, our annual monitoring reports, rather. They all have advanced learner data in them. So I guess I need to learn more about what variation on that theme that we're interested in. I would say, though, that the idea of intersectionality of student identities, for example, for the special ed plan, is exactly what we're trying to do these days as we're growing our experiences and our tools around in-group analysis.
So I think you all heard, Lisa, did you have anything else to add? I think you all heard really clear. Okay, Nikki.
I'm sorry.
Here's
Here's what I'd like to see out of the advanced learner data. How many individuals of color are in advanced learning courses? How are we recruiting individuals of color, black and brown, in advanced learning courses? How are we recruiting people in both leadership and the arts in advanced learning courses? How do we determine if advanced honors is equal to regular honors? All of those,
So
I think,
those
need
are
to-
reasonable questions, Laura.
I mean, I think, just to, from what Katie and I think we just need to, it seems a follow-up from previous conversations.
There's
right?
clearly
I know
some
it's-
frustration for the way we went through this last time.
This
So
time.
sorry that you guys are getting the front of
It
it.
is, and it's also really hard. I mean, I understand with staff, right, transitioning board members, but I think this is a very important,
the prioritizing that. I think there's also an exercise around what is the monitoring, the yearly monitoring look like, and I think this is a good example to start articulating what would that look like. Ali?
Yeah, so I just want to remind this body, because this comes up every time we talk about advanced learners, particularly when we talk about advanced learners and kids of color, that we start to say things like recruit or develop versus recognize.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
And
didn't
so
think about that.
You're not, it's not you. It's not just you. I just want to say, like, there is a sentiment that's being exchanged around students of color when accessing these services that is not recognizing that young people of color are inherently gifted and talented and deserve to be served in such a way. And so I think that is a note to us as we continue to have this conversation. And
Good
it's
call.
something that I will continue to say. If
I
we-
appreciate
if we fail to use the word recognize students of color as having a gifted and the needs of those students of color.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. I always forget. So, thank you.
Ali. And
We
you were-
currently have one advanced learner in the entire district in data dashboard. I think it's because of enrollment in data dashboard.
Yeah,
which I just think
it's
is
an
really
annual
cool.
attribute. I'm surprised we have one. It's an attribute that's established at the beginning of every school year, so current active enrollments are pre-1920 school year. So the one is actually an error.
That's really, so we calibrate every year for that attribute? Do we do that for all of the attributes?
Effectively, yes. So families that are participating in free and reduced lunch may opt not to from one year to the next, though their economic situation may not have changed. Students or families can change race, ethnic identity from one year to the
For
next.
ELLs? I'll stop.
All right,
I'm just
we're like
curious. Yep.
beyond the scope.
Yep, it's all
We
good.
just did the emails. In the essence of language or the vocabulary we use about our students, I did have a crunch around the at-risk title
Yes.
on the page 2
Sorry.
as well. And I'll leave it that. I know. I've been trying. You all. I've been trying. So here's how I said, like, use whatever term and then put in parentheses, federally recognized or state recognized as XYZ.
Happy to do that,
Because-
and if the board would like to
Gotcha.
draft a letter to DPI asking that
Yes,
language
I'll
be
hand deliver.
updated. But it is statutory established, so we may be a while.
Yeah. All right, everyone. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second, so moved.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Lisa and Andrew. And we're gonna recess for like 7 minutes.
That works.